Before celebrity chef Marcus Romano learned that disrespecting a legend has consequences, he thought an elderly customer would be an easy target for his notorious temper. This is the story of how Clint Eastwood's devastating response turned the chef's own restaurant into his worst nightmare. "I don't care who you are in this restaurant, old man," celebrity chef Marcus Romano screamed at 94-year-old Clint Eastwood as shocked customers watched. But Clint's calm response turned the chef's own restaurant into his nightmare and destroyed his career forever. Romano's was the kind of upscale Beverly Hills restaurant where reservations were booked months in advance, and celebrity sightings were as common as overpriced appetizers. The establishment had earned its reputation not just for exceptional cuisine, but for the theatrical performances of its owner and head chef, Marcus Romano. At 45, Romano had built his brand on a combination of culinary skill and explosive temperament that made for compelling television and viral social media moments. The restaurant buzzed with its usual evening energy on a Tuesday night in September 2024. The dining room was filled with entertainment industry executives, social media influencers, and wealthy locals who came as much for the show as for the food. Romano's kitchen tantrums were legendary, and diners often hoped to witness one of his famous meltdowns that had made him a household name. Clint Eastwood arrived at Romano's that evening for what should have been a quiet dinner with an old friend, veteran character actor James Whitmore Jr. At 94, Clint moved more slowly than he once had, using a walking cane and requiring assistance from the valet. He was dressed simply in dark slacks, a button-down shirt, and a light jacket, nothing that would immediately identify him as one of Hollywood's most enduring legends to staff who might be too young to recognize him. The hostess, a 20-something aspiring actress named Madison, looked at the elderly man with barely concealed impatience. The reservation was under Whitmore's name, and when Clint explained he was dining with Mr. Whitmore, who was running late, she seemed skeptical. "Sir, we have a very strict policy about seating incomplete parties," she said, her tone suggesting this old man was already causing problems. Marcus Romano observed the interaction from across the dining room, where he was making his usual rounds, greeting important customers and ensuring his presence was felt throughout the restaurant. He noticed the elderly man at the hostess stand and immediately categorized him as the type of customer who would likely complain about prices, send food back, and generally disrupt the sophisticated atmosphere he had worked to create. When Whitmore arrived 15 minutes later, profusely apologizing for traffic delays, the hostess reluctantly seated the pair at a corner table that was typically reserved for less important guests. Romano watched the seating with approval, satisfied that the old man had been put in his proper place, out of sight of the restaurant's more influential clientele. What Romano failed to recognize was that he was looking at a man who had commanded respect in Hollywood for 7 decades, who had built a career on quiet dignity and unshakable principles, and who had never backed down from a confrontation when his character was questioned. The trouble began during the second course when Clint politely asked their server if the fish could be prepared with less salt due to dietary restrictions his doctor had recommended. It was a simple, reasonable request, delivered with characteristic courtesy. The server, a nervous young man named Tyler who had been working at Romano's for only 3 weeks, nodded and promised to check with the kitchen. Tyler's mistake was mentioning the request to Marcus Romano, who was already in an irritable mood after a food critic's lukewarm review that morning. "What did you say?" Romano snapped, his voice carrying across the kitchen loud enough to be heard in the nearby dining room. "Some old guy wants us to change our signature preparation? Who the hell does he think he is?" The kitchen staff exchanged nervous glances. They had seen Romano's explosions before, but something about his tone tonight suggested this would be worse than usual. Tyler tried to explain that it was just a simple dietary request, but Romano was already working himself into one of his trademark rages. "You go back out there," Romano commanded, pointing a knife toward the dining room, "and you tell that entitled old bastard that if he doesn't like how we prepare our food, he can eat somewhere else. This isn't a nursing home cafeteria." Tyler's face went pale. "Chef," he was very polite about it. "Maybe we could just—" "Did I ask for your opinion?" Romano roared, his face flushing red. "Go tell him exactly what I said, or you can find another job tonight." The confrontation that followed would be witnessed by a dining room full of customers, many of whom began discreetly recording with their phones when they heard Romano's voice rising from the kitchen. Tyler reluctantly returned to Clint's table, where he delivered a watered-down version of the chef's message, explaining that the kitchen couldn't accommodate the request. Clint accepted the response with grace, simply noting that he would eat what he could and leave the rest. But Romano, watching from the kitchen doorway, wasn't satisfied with this resolution. He had worked himself into a state of righteous indignation about customers who dared question his culinary vision, and he decided to make an example of the elderly man who had committed this perceived slight. What happened next would transform a simple misunderstanding into a career-ending catastrophe, as Marcus Romano made the fatal mistake of confusing an aging body with a weakened spirit. He was about to learn that some people have earned the right to quiet respect through decades of achievement, and that attacking such a person publicly comes with consequences he never imagined. Marcus Romano's decision to confront Clint Eastwood publicly was driven by a toxic combination of ego, anger, and the performative nature that had made him famous. He burst through the kitchen doors into the dining room with the theatrical flair that his regular customers had come to expect, but with an aggression that immediately made everyone uncomfortable. "Where's the customer who thinks he can tell me how to cook my food?" Romano announced loudly, his voice carrying to every corner of the restaurant. Conversation stopped, silverware paused midway to mouths, and all eyes turned toward the unfolding drama. He strode directly to Clint's corner table, his chef's coat still bearing stains from the kitchen, his face flushed with anger. Tyler tried to intercept him, but Romano brushed past the young server with dismissive force. The other diners watched in fascination and growing horror as they realized they were about to witness one of Romano's legendary meltdowns up close. "You," Romano said, pointing directly at Clint with undisguised contempt. "You think you can come into my restaurant and tell me how to prepare my signature dishes? You think because you're old you deserve special treatment?" Clint looked up at the aggressive chef calmly, his expression unchanged despite the public confrontation. James Whitmore shifted uncomfortably in his seat, recognizing the dangerous situation developing, but unsure how to intervene without making it worse. Romano's voice grew louder, his performance now in full swing for the captivated audience. "I've been cooking for 25 years. I've earned my reputation. I don't change my recipes for anyone, especially not for some entitled old man who probably can't even taste the difference anymore." The insults came in a rush, each one more personal and cruel than the last. "You want bland food? Go to McDonald's. You want to be catered to like a baby? Go to a nursing home. But don't come into my establishment and expect me to dumb down my cuisine for your failing taste buds." The dining room had fallen into stunned silence. Even Romano's most devoted customers seemed shocked by the viciousness of his attack on an elderly customer who had done nothing more than make a polite dietary request. Phones were openly recording now, capturing every word of what was rapidly becoming one of the most shameful displays of hospitality abuse in Beverly Hills history. "I don't care who you think you are," Romano concluded, his voice reaching a crescendo that could be heard throughout the restaurant. "In this restaurant, I'm the only one who matters, so either eat what I serve you or get the hell out." The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the quiet clink of Clint Eastwood setting down his water glass. The silence in Romano's stretched until it became unbearable. Every eye in the packed restaurant was fixed on Clint Eastwood, waiting to see how the elderly man would respond to such a vicious and public humiliation. The cameras continued recording, capturing every detail as Clint slowly pushed back his chair and stood up with the careful movements of his 94 years. When Clint finally spoke, his voice was quiet, but carried clearly through the restaurant's acoustics. The contrast with Romano's shouting made his words even more powerful. "Son," he said, the word carrying decades of experience and authority that made Romano's bluster seem suddenly childish. "I've been treated better by enemies than you've treated me as a customer." He paused, letting the words sink in as he reached for his walking cane. "I came here for a quiet dinner with an old friend. I made a simple request that any professional establishment should be able to accommodate. Instead, you've chosen to make a spectacle of your own ignorance." The effect on Romano was immediate. His confident posture began to waver as he realized that this wasn't going according to his usual script. Normally, customers either cowered before his aggressive display or stormed out in anger, both outcomes that he could spin as victories. But Clint's calm dignity was exposing Romano's behavior for what it really was: bullying. "You want to know who I am?" Clint continued, his voice remaining level but gaining an edge that made everyone lean forward. "I'm someone who's built things that last. I'm someone who's treated people with respect regardless of their station. And I'm someone who recognizes a coward when I see one." The word coward hit Romano like a physical blow. His face went from flushed with anger to pale with sudden uncertainty. Around the dining room, customers began to murmur as they started to recognize the elderly man who was quietly dismantling the famous chef. "You hide behind your reputation, your kitchen, your staff," Clint said, taking a step closer to Romano. "But when it comes down to character, you're bankrupt. A real chef serves all his customers with pride. A real man doesn't attack someone he thinks can't fight back." He looked around the dining room at the recording phones, the stunned faces, the staff members who were watching their boss being systematically destroyed by someone who never raised his voice. But most importantly, Clint concluded, delivering the final blow with devastating simplicity, a real professional knows that reputation isn't something you demand. It's something you earn every single day. And today, you've lost yours. What followed was perhaps more devastating than Clint's verbal dismantling. Marcus Romano, who had built his career on never backing down from a confrontation, found himself completely speechless in front of a dining room full of witnesses. His mouth opened and closed as he searched for a comeback that simply didn't exist. The recognition began slowly, then spread through the restaurant like wildfire. A diner at a nearby table whispered to her companion, "Oh my God, that's Clint Eastwood." Within moments, the murmur had become a buzz as customers realized they had just witnessed a legendary actor and director being abused by an arrogant chef, and then watched that same legend quietly destroy his attacker without ever losing his dignity. Romano's face cycled through a range of emotions: confusion, dawning recognition, and finally, pure horror as he understood what he had done. He had just publicly humiliated one of Hollywood's most respected figures, and worse, he had been completely outclassed in the confrontation that followed. James Whitmore stood up beside his friend, placing a supportive hand on Clint's shoulder. "Come on, Clint," he said quietly. "Let's find somewhere that understands hospitality." As they prepared to leave, something remarkable happened. The entire dining room erupted in applause. It started with one customer, then spread until every person in the restaurant was standing and clapping for the 94-year-old man who had just demonstrated what real class looked like under pressure. Romano stood frozen in the middle of his own restaurant, watching his reputation disintegrate in real time. Several customers were already putting money on their tables and preparing to leave, their expensive meals forgotten in the wake of what they had witnessed. The restaurant's assistant manager, Maria Santos, rushed over to attempt damage control. "Mr. Eastwood, please let me comp your meal. But Clint gently waved her off. "Ma'am," he said with characteristic politeness, "this isn't your fault, but you might want to think about whether this is the kind of place you want your name associated with." As Clint and James made their way toward the exit, Romano finally found his voice. "Wait," he called out desperately. "I didn't know. I mean, if I had known who you were." Clint stopped and turned back one final time. "Son," he said, his voice carrying to every corner of the now silent restaurant, "if you only treat people with respect after you know who they are, then you don't understand what respect means." And with that, he walked out into the Beverly Hills night, leaving behind a career-ending catastrophe that would be replaying on social media within minutes. The aftermath of what became known as the Romano meltdown was swift and merciless. Within hours of the incident, videos of the confrontation were trending across every social media platform. The hashtag #Clint's Restaurant Revenge reached the top of Twitter's trending topics, while TikTok users created countless reaction videos expressing shock at Romano's behavior and admiration for Eastwood's composed response. The public reaction was overwhelmingly supportive of Clint and condemnatory of Romano's conduct. Celebrity chefs from around the world publicly distanced themselves from Romano's behavior, with many sharing their own stories of treating all customers with equal respect, regardless of fame or status. For Marcus Romano personally, the consequences were immediate and devastating. By the following morning, 3 major investors had pulled their backing from his restaurant empire. The Food Network canceled his upcoming show, and several celebrity endorsement deals were quietly terminated. Romano's restaurant saw a 70% drop in reservations within a week as customers chose to dine elsewhere rather than support an establishment associated with such unprofessional behavior. The incident sparked broader conversations about ageism, customer service, and the responsibility that comes with public platforms. Hospitality industry publications used the episode as a case study in how personal ego and celebrity status could destroy professional judgment and business success. Romano attempted several public apologies over the following weeks, but each one seemed to make the situation worse. His claim that he didn't know who Clint Eastwood was widely mocked, while his suggestion that he was just having a bad day was seen as tone-deaf given the severity of his behavior. Clint Eastwood, characteristically, declined to participate in the media circus that followed. He issued one brief statement through his publicist. "I went out for dinner and ended up getting a lesson in why character matters more than celebrity. I hope Mr. Romano learns from this experience." Perhaps most significantly, the incident became a defining moment about how to respond to unprovoked attacks with dignity rather than aggression. Clint had faced one of the most public humiliations imaginable, and had responded with such grace that he had not only defended himself, but had strengthened his already legendary reputation. The lesson was clear to everyone who witnessed the exchange. True class isn't about demanding respect. It's about commanding it through behavior, character, and the quiet strength that comes from a lifetime of treating others with dignity. Romano's restaurant closed permanently 6 months later, a victim of its owner's spectacular failure to understand that in the service industry, how you treat your worst day defines who you really are. Have you ever witnessed someone handle disrespect with such dignity that it completely changed the situation? Share your story in the comments below.
Don't forget to hit the like button if you liked the video and subscribe if you want videos like this to come. See you in the next story.